Hello, my name is Winifred. I am 63 years old, and this is the story of the holiday that changed how I see my own family. My son begged me to come stay with him for Christmas. I crossed 10 hours of sky, aching bones and hopeful heart, imagining hugs, warm food, maybe laughter. Instead, when the door opened, there was no hello, no smile, just instructions. You'll babysit our 7 dogs. We're going on my wife's family trip. Before I could even process it, my daughter-in-law laughed and told the children, "Don't wipe your snot on her." They all laughed together. I stood there with my suitcase, feeling small, invisible, like I had already been assigned my place. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just smiled and said one simple sentence. That's when everything shifted. The laughter stopped. The air changed. My son's face drained of color as he whispered over and over, "No, no, no way." Whatever I said wasn't loud or cruel, but it hit exactly where it needed to. And that moment? That was only the beginning. What happened next unraveled secrets, power, and a truth they never expected me to carry. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I truly love reading your comments and knowing where you come from. Now let's understand how this story really began. I arrived at my son's house with my bones aching from 10 hours folded into an airplane seat and my heart strangely hopeful, like a foolish child who still believes that love will always be waiting at the door. I had replayed David's voice in my head the entire flight, soft, almost pleading. "Please come, Mom. It won't be the same without you." I clung to that sentence like a promise. When the door finally opened, there was no smile, no hug, not even my name. "You'll babysit our 7 dogs," he said flatly, already stepping aside so I could see the chaos behind him. "We're leaving for my wife's family trip." I blinked, convinced for a moment that exhaustion had distorted my hearing. 7 dogs barked from every direction, nails scratching hardwood, bowls overturned, the air thick with neglect and old smells. I searched his face for humor, for embarrassment, for anything human. Ashley appeared behind him, phone in hand, eyes already bored. One of the children wiped his nose on her sleeve and she laughed, sharp and careless. "Don't wipe your snot on our kids," she said, nodding toward me as if I were furniture. They laughed together. Even David smiled, tight, nervous, but complicit. Something inside me went very still. I had given up staying with my loyal dog Benny, my shadow for 13 years to come here. I had kissed the top of his golden head goodbye, whispering that it was only for a few days, that I was needed. Standing there now, suitcased at my feet, I understood the truth with painful clarity. I wasn't needed. I was useful. I smiled, slowly, carefully, the way you do when you're standing on thin ice and know that any sudden movement might send you under. "I know about the second mortgage," I said quietly. "The one you took out in my name." The room changed instantly. David's face drained of color, his mouth opening without sound. Ashley grabbed his arm, her nails digging in hard enough that I could see the skin blanch. "We'll deal with this later," she hissed. Come on, they didn't argue, they didn't threaten. That alone told me how deep the truth cut. They rushed out, barking instructions over their shoulders about feeding times and vet numbers I knew were lies. The door slammed. I heard the lock click from the outside. For a moment, I just stood there. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. What I felt was disappointment so heavy it pressed against my ribs. I had raised my son better than this. Or so I thought. I rolled my suitcase into the living room and opened it. Benny's head popped up from his travel crate, eyes warm and steady, tail thumping once against the plastic. I knelt, pressing my forehead to his. "All right, my boy," I whispered. "Let's see what mess they've made." He licked my cheek, grounding me. I fetched water for the dogs, moving slowly through the kitchen, taking in the filth. The half-empty cupboards, the carelessness that mirrored the way I had been treated. When I reached for a glass, my eyes caught on a piece of paper pinned to the refrigerator with a red magnet. Foreclosure notice. Eviction. Tomorrow. I stared at it for a long time. Then I straightened, my reflection staring back at me in the stainless steel older. Yes, but not broken. They thought they had trapped me. They were wrong. The house sounded different once they were gone. Not quiet, just hollow, like a place that had learned to echo instead of listen. The dogs paced in confused loops, nails clicking, tails low, eyes darting to the door as if waiting for people who never truly came back for them. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. It didn't take long for the truth to settle into my chest. This wasn't a vacation. It was a disappearance. They hadn't left me here to help. They had left me here to absorb the impact. To be the body inside the house when the bank arrived. To be the frail, elderly woman whose heart might give out under pressure, whose collapse could be blamed on age instead of cruelty. If I died here, confused and frightened, it would have been neat, clean, convenient. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes for a moment, breathing through the wave of nausea that followed the realization. Not fear. Clarity. The kind that burns. Well, I murmured to no one, that explains the locks. Benny pressed his side against my leg, solid and warm. I rested my hand on his head, letting the steady rhythm of his breathing anchor me. Whatever this house was hiding, I wasn't facing it alone. The kitchen was worse in daylight. Dried food cemented to plates, trash pushed down instead of taken out. Water rings bloomed across the counter like neglect made visible. I rolled up my sleeves and began to clean, not because they deserved it, but because I did. Because order has always been my way back to myself. As I worked, I talked to the dogs softly. 7 of them, different sizes, different ages, all carrying the same wary confusion. "You're safe," I told them, one by one, as I filled bowls and set them on the floor. "No one's yelling today. No one's forgetting you." They ate like they didn't trust the food would last. Benny stood among them, not aggressive, just present, calm. A quiet authority radiated from him, and slowly, miraculously, the chaos softened. Tails lifted, shoulders lowered. Even the smallest one dared to look up at me while chewing. I swallowed past the ache in my throat. My son could not give them this kindness. That truth hurt more than the filth. By late afternoon, the kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner instead of rot. My hands were raw, my back aching, but the space felt lighter. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly, standing at the sink, watching dust drift through the sunbeams like tiny, indifferent witnesses. The dog food bags were nearly empty. "Basement then," I said, grabbing a flashlight. "Come on, Benny." The stairs creaked beneath us, each step protesting our descent. The basement smelled damp and forgotten, the air colder, heavier. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with boxes labeled in Ashley's sharp handwriting. Taxes, winter, misc. Benny stiffened. He moved ahead of me, nose low, tail rigid. Then he stopped near the far wall and began scratching at the floor. Hard. Urgent. A sound ripped from his throat. Not a bark, but a whine so sharp it sliced straight through me. "Benny?" I knelt beside him. "What is it?" Scratched again, then looked at me, eyes wide, pleading. The floorboard beneath his paw shifted slightly. My heart began to pound. I pried the board up with shaking fingers, expecting what? Money? Jewelry? Some physical proof of greed I could name and catalog? Instead, I found paper, stacks of it, neatly arranged. Official letterhead, medical logos, my name. I sat back on my heels, the flashlight trembling in my hand as I lifted the top page. The words blurred for a moment before snapping into focus. Advanced dementia, loss of executive function, patient deemed unfit to manage personal or financial affairs. "No," I whispered. I flipped through them, faster now, breath shallow. Dates, signatures, diagnoses that did not belong to me, a future written in ink by someone who had decided I was already gone. My hands fell into my lap. The basement seemed to tilt. They hadn't just planned to erase me from my house. They had planned to erase me. Benny pressed his nose under my chin, forcing my face up. I wrapped my arms around his neck and held on as the truth settled, heavy and undeniable. This house wasn't just full of secrets. It was a crime scene. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt something ignite beneath the hurt quiet, steady, unstoppable. Resolve. I carried the papers upstairs as if they were something fragile, though I already knew they were weapons. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of my age, but because with every page I read, another memory fractured. I sat at the dining table, the same one where I had once helped David practice multiplication tables, where I had wrapped birthday gifts, where I had signed checks without hesitation, because love, to me, had always been an action. Benny lay at my feet, his body stretched protectively across the space between me and the room, as if he understood that something sacred was being threatened. I read slowly, carefully. I had been a teacher for 4 decades. I knew how to read between lines, how to spot intention hiding behind formal language. This wasn't just about forcing me out of the house. They were planning to take everything. The forged medical evaluations were designed to do more than paint me as confused. They labeled me incapable, unfit, a liability to myself. With those documents, they could petition the court for control over my finances, my decisions, my life. My retirement fund, the one I had built penny by penny after my husband died. My home in Florida, fully paid off. The place I planned to grow old with my books and my garden and the sound of the ocean I loved. They were going to steal my future and call it care. My vision blurred. A single tear escaped before I could stop it, sliding down my cheek and dripping onto the paper. I brushed it away impatiently, angry at myself for the weakness, but the pain surged anyway, sharp and undeniable. I saw David at 18 sitting at this very table, his acceptance letters spread out before him, hands shaking. I had paid for his college without question. I saw Ashley's face when I handed her the keys to the car she needed, her smile quick, already distracted. I remembered holidays, emergency calls, the quiet pride I felt believing I had raised a good man. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it burned. My chest tightened, breath catching as if my body itself couldn't quite believe what my mind already knew. This wasn't desperation. This was calculation. They hadn't snapped. They had planned. I pushed the papers away and pressed my palms flat against the table until the shaking in my hands subsided. Benny lifted his head and rested it gently on my knee, his eyes searching my face with a depth of concern that felt achingly human. "I know," I whispered, my fingers threading through his fur. "I know, I let myself feel it then." The grief. The loss of the son I thought I had. The mourning of a relationship that had existed more in my hope than in reality. It washed over me in a quiet wave, not dramatic, not loud, just devastating in its clarity. When it passed, something else remained. Stillness. I looked down at Benny, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, at the unwavering loyalty in his gaze. He didn't see me as weak. He didn't see me as disposable. To him, I was simply his person. "They think I'm a helpless old woman," I said softly, more to myself than to him. My voice no longer trembled. "They think age made me foolish." I leaned closer, resting my forehead against his. "So let's show them who taught them how to walk." The words didn't feel vengeful. They felt honest, like reclaiming a truth I had allowed myself to forget. The phone rang. I startled, the sharp sound slicing through the quiet. For a brief moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, allowing my voice to soften, to fray at the edges. There was a pause, then a man's voice, brisk and professional. "Yes, this is the bank. I'm calling to confirm that the wire transfer of your mother's savings is scheduled for Friday." He didn't realize he was speaking to the mother, and in that moment I understood exactly how they planned to finish me. I didn't correct him. That was the first decision that mattered. I let my shoulders slump slightly as I held the phone, allowed a tremor into my hand, softened my voice until it sounded thin and uncertain, like a woman who apologizes for taking up space. I had used this tone before countless times in grocery stores, clinics, government offices, when people stopped listening the moment they saw my age. "Oh dear," I said quietly. "Friday, you said? That's soon, isn't it?" The loan officer sighed, the way men do when they believe patience is generosity. "Yes, ma'am. Everything is already arranged. The funds will be wired from your mother's primary retirement account into the designated holding account." "I see," I murmured. "And, forgive me, I do get confused. Which account was that again?" He hesitated, then continued, confident in my confusion. Numbers followed. Routing details. Names. I repeated them back slowly, as if committing them to memory when in truth I was carving them into stone. I asked small questions, harmless questions, each one rewarded with another piece of the puzzle. By the time I hung up, my tea had gone cold and my heart was beating steadily, not with panic, but with purpose. They thought weakness was something they could recognize. They were wrong. I wrote everything down in my neat teacher's handwriting, the same script that once graded essays and wrote encouragements in red ink. When I finished, I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my purse right beside Benny's treats. "Good boy," I told him, scratching behind his ears. "We have work to do." The dogs were restless, pacing near the door, their energy buzzing without direction. I clipped leashes one by one, my movements unhurried. When we stepped outside, the air felt different, cooler, cleaner, as if the world itself was offering me a breath. 7 dogs and 1 golden retriever is not a sight easily ignored. Curtains shifted, doors opened a crack. People stared as I walked past, chin lifted, posture calm. Benny moved beside me with quiet confidence, keeping the pack aligned. The dogs responded to him instinctively, falling into step as if relieved to finally have guidance. At the corner, Mrs. Gable stood watering her roses. She froze when she saw me, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it with a polite smile. "Well," she said cautiously, "you've got your hands full." "I do," I replied warmly, "but they're good souls. They just needed someone to notice them." She watched the dogs for a moment, then looked at me again, curiosity edging into concern. "I'm glad to see you out. David said you weren't feeling well." I stopped walking. "Oh?" I said lightly. "What did he say exactly?" Mrs. Gable shifted her weight, uncomfortable. "That you were losing your mind, that you'd become unpredictable, violent, even. We were worried. Violent." The words settled over me like ash. I smiled, gentle and composed, the way I had in parent-teacher meetings when someone spoke carelessly about a child they did not understand. "That must have been frightening to hear," I said. "I'm sorry he put that worry on you." Her eyes narrowed slightly as she took me in my steady hands, the calm dogs, the quiet clarity in my gaze. Understanding bloomed slowly. "Oh," she said again. This time it meant something else entirely. We talked for a few minutes more. About the weather, about her roses, about nothing important and everything. When I walked away, I felt something loosen inside my chest. The lie had been exposed, if only to one person. It was a beginning. Back inside, I didn't waste time. I called my lawyer. Mr. Henderson answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert, like a blade sliding free of its sheath. "Winifred, this is unexpected. I need you," I said simply. "And I need you to listen carefully." I told him everything, the forged documents, the wire transfer, the foreclosure. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then, I'll handle it. I want my accounts liquidated immediately, I said. Every dollar. I want the funds moved somewhere my son cannot trace or touch. Understood. And Henderson, I added, my voice firm. No one hears about this unless I say so. A brief chuckle. You taught me well. When I ended the call, the house felt too quiet. I turned and froze. A small black lens blinked at me from the corner of the living room. Red, watching. I didn't move. I didn't react. I simply stood there, heart steady, mind clear. Let them watch. They had no idea what they were about to see. I stood very still, listening to the soft hum of the house, to the quiet breathing of the dogs, to the slow, measured beat of my own heart. The red light blinked again. Patient, expectant. So this was part of it too. They hadn't just left me to fail. They wanted to watch me fail. I let my shoulders sag. I let my mouth fall open slightly, as if thought itself had slipped away. I took a hesitant step forward, then another, dragging my foot just enough to look unsteady. Oh dear, I muttered to the lamp near the sofa. Now where did you come from? I tilted my head, squinting at it suspiciously. You shouldn't be here. David said you moved. I felt ridiculous, and furious, and strangely calm all at once. I knew David was watching. I could picture him exactly as he was leaning forward, jaw tight, eyes locked on the screen. I imagined the relief spreading through him, the ugly comfort of being proven right. See? She really is gone. I shuffled across the living room, knocking into the arm of the couch and grabbing at the air for balance. Benny watched me closely, ears alert, body tense but obedient. He understood performance. We had practiced obedience in parks full of noise and distraction. This was no different. I'm sorry, I said to no one, my voice trembling on purpose. I didn't mean to. I reached the side table and let my hand shake just enough before bumping it hard with my hip. The vase toppled, shattering loudly against the floor. Glass exploded outward, sharp and final. Oh! I cried out, clutching my chest. Oh, no, no, no. I bent down awkwardly, wincing, making a show of struggling to understand what had happened. From the corner of my eye, I saw Benny move. Smooth. Silent. He slipped under the sofa and re-emerged with something black clutched carefully in his mouth. Good boy. I scooped him up in my arms, pressing my face into his fur as if overwhelmed, hiding the small weight of the phone against my palm. I'm all right, I whispered into his ear. Go, lie down. I carried myself down the hall, one hand trailing along the wall as if for support, until I reached the bathroom. I closed the door gently and locked it. The silence inside was thick. My hands stopped shaking immediately. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the phone. A burner, cheap. Smudged with fingerprints. Ashley's carelessness had always been her downfall. I turned it on. Messages bloomed across the screen like bruises. Explicit ones. Intimate. Ashley's laughter reduced to crude text, promises typed with casual cruelty. She wasn't just cheating on my son, she was mocking him. Men I didn't recognize. Conversations that made my stomach twist, not with shock, but with pity. Then I scrolled further. Photos of blinking slot machines. A half-empty cocktail glass. A carpet I recognized from commercials. A casino 2 hours away. Not a vacation, not family. Just flashing lights and borrowed money. Credit they expected to erase with my life savings. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly through the ache that flared in my chest. This wasn't vindication. This was confirmation. And it hurt in a quiet, enduring way. I thought of David as a child, hiding behind my leg when strangers spoke too loudly. I thought of the way he used to look at me, like I could fix anything. Somewhere along the way, he had learned to watch suffering instead of stop it. I opened the messaging app again. Found David's name. My fingers hovered over the screen for just a moment. Then I typed, I think she knows. Come back now. I sent it. I deleted it. I powered the phone off and tucked it deep into my purse, beneath the folded paper with account numbers, beneath years of patience, finally transformed into action. When I stepped back into the living room, I resumed the shuffle. I stared at the broken glass as if seeing it for the first time, then sank into the armchair with a confused sigh. The red light blinked. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. This time, I wasn't waiting in hope. I was waiting in control. I didn't need to see their faces to know they were on their way. The house itself seemed to sense it, the air tightening, the dogs growing restless, Benny lifting his head every few minutes as if listening to something only he could hear. I moved calmly through it all because panic had no place left in me. Panic was what they expected. Precision was what they would get. I sat at the dining table again, phone in hand, spine straight. I called the number printed on the foreclosure notice, my voice steady now, stripped of tremor and confusion. "Yes," I said when the woman answered. "I'm calling about the mortgage note on the property at this address." There was a pause, keys clicking. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am," I replied. And for the first time, that answer carried weight instead of vulnerability. The conversation was long, clinical. Numbers passed between us like chess pieces. I asked questions. I listened. I waited. When she finally told me the amount needed to purchase the debt outright, I didn't gasp. I didn't hesitate. "I'll buy it," I said simply. Silence stretched on the other end of the line. "You understand," she said carefully, "that this would make you the holder of the mortgage note." "Yes," I replied. "That's exactly what I intend." When the call ended, I closed my eyes and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The money came from accounts they hadn't touched yet, funds I had protected without even knowing why for years. Clean money. Mine. With a few signatures and transfers, something shifted fundamentally. Technically, legally, irrevocably, I owned the debt on my son's house. I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance returning to the world. The next call was easier. The woman at the animal shelter had a voice worn soft by compassion and exhaustion. I explained the situation plainly. 7 dogs, neglected, used for breeding, not safe where they were. "We can take them," she said, hesitation laced with hope. "But resources are tight." "They won't be," I answered. "I'll sponsor them. Medical care, food, whatever they need." She exhaled, a sound that carried relief like a prayer. "Thank you," she whispered. When I hung up, I looked around the room, at the dogs, at Benny, at the mess that had once symbolized abandonment and now felt like a responsibility I had chosen. "You're all going to be all right," I told them. And for the first time, I meant myself too. With hours still left, I did something unexpected. I cooked. I seasoned the roast the way I always had by memory, not recipe, garlic, thyme, a careful hand with the salt. As it cooked, the house changed. Warmth crept into the corners. The scent filled rooms that had known nothing but tension and neglect. Even the dogs settled, lying near the kitchen as if soothed by something older than fear. I set the table carefully. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because I wanted clarity. When the roast was finished, I carved it slowly, deliberately, the way my husband used to when life still felt shared. I placed everything neatly, wiped my hands, and sat down. Benny took his place beside me, solid and unyielding. My hand rested on his head, fingers curling into familiar fur. Whatever happened next, I would meet it standing. Then headlights swept across the walls, the sound of tires on gravel, a car door slamming, another, voices sharp, frantic, overlapping. The front door flew open hard enough to rattle the frame. David and Ashley burst in, faces flushed, eyes wild, fear barely masked by anger. They looked around as if expecting chaos. Instead, they found dinner. I lifted my gaze calmly, knife resting beside my plate. "You're late," I said, and in that moment, I knew the trap had closed. David's voice hit the room before his footsteps did. "What did you do?" he shouted, the words sharp with panic. "Why did you text me? What is going on?" I didn't look up right away. I continued cutting my roast, slow and deliberate, the knife gliding cleanly through the meat. The sound of it, soft, controlled, felt louder than his yelling. Benny sat at my side, his body angled slightly forward, a low, steady growl vibrating in his chest. Not a threat. A warning. David stopped short when he took it all in. The table set. The food plated. Me seated at the head as if I had never left. Ashley hovered just behind him, breathing too fast. Eyes darting from the table to the hallway, to the dogs lying quietly along the walls like silent witnesses. "Mom," David said, his voice cracking with rage and fear. "Answer me!" I placed my knife down carefully and folded my napkin. Then I looked at him. Truly looked. The boy I once rocked to sleep was gone. In his place stood a man whose eyes searched not for his mother's face, but for control slipping through his fingers. "Sit down, David," I said. The words landed heavy. There was no tremor in my voice now, no softness, no confusion. The mask I had worn for their benefit fell away completely, and what remained was the woman who had raised him, disciplined him, paid his tuition, and buried her husband without breaking. "We need to discuss your rent." His mouth fell open. What are you talking about?" Ashley laughed sharply, trying to reclaim the upper hand. "You're not well," she snapped, stepping closer to me. "Too close. You think you can just—" She reached out, her hand slicing through the air toward me, an attempt to loom, to frighten, to remind me of my supposed frailty. Benny exploded to his feet. The bark that tore from him was thunderous, deep and commanding, echoing off the walls with a force that stopped Ashley cold. She stumbled back instinctively, hand flying to her chest, color draining from her face. "Do not," I said calmly, never raising my voice, "take another step toward me." The room went still. David's eyes flicked to the dog, then back to me. "You're scaring her," he said weakly. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting myself. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." I reached into my purse and withdrew the documents, sliding them across the table toward him. The paper whispered softly against the wood, a sound so gentle it felt almost merciful. "What's this?" he asked, though his hands were already shaking. "Read," I said. He did, slowly at first, then faster. His breathing grew shallow, his face flushing as comprehension dawned. Ashley leaned over his shoulder, scanning the pages, her jaw tightening with each line. "You can't," David began. "I can," I interrupted. And I did. I purchased the mortgage note on this house. Legally. Cleanly. It now belongs to me. I let the silence stretch. "You are trespassing," I continued. "Both of you." Ashley's bravado shattered. She let out a sharp sob that seemed to rip straight through her chest, then dropped to her knees in front of me, hands clutching at my legs. "You can't kick us out!" she screamed. "You can't! I'm pregnant!" The word hung in the air like a final, desperate card thrown on the table. Pregnant. I froze. For just a fraction of a second, the room blurred. A grandchild. A future. A fragile new life that might soften all the sharp edges carved into my heart over the last days. My breath caught, and I hated myself for how quickly hope tried to rise. David stared at her, stunned. "You are?" he whispered. Ashley sobbed harder, burying her face against my knees. Yes, I am. Please, Winifred, please. You wouldn't throw out your own grandchild." I looked down at her shaking shoulders, at the performance layered atop a performance, at the last refuge of people who had already burned every bridge behind them. Benny stepped closer, his nose lowering toward her bag, his body tense, alert, and I knew deep in my bones that this story wasn't over yet. David's face drained of color as Ashley clung to my legs, her sobs loud and uneven, meant to drown out reason. "Pregnant?" he whispered. The word didn't sound like anger or joy. It sounded like disbelief. "You never told me." She shook harder, nodding into my knees as if that alone could make it true. "I was scared," she cried. "I didn't know how to say it. Everything's been so stressful. Please, please don't do this." For a moment, just one dangerous, fragile moment, my resolve wavered. A grandchild. The thought landed softly, painfully, in the center of my chest. I saw flashes of a future I hadn't dared imagine anymore. Small shoes by the door, a laugh in the hallway, a second chance at loving without conditions. I'd always loved family fiercely, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. I looked at David, then really looked at him. He seemed smaller, somehow, unanchored, his eyes darting between his wife and me, desperate for someone else to decide what was real. My voice softened despite myself. "Leslie, if this is true," I said slowly, "then everything changes." Her grip tightened instantly, like a drowning person sensing rescue. "It is," she sobbed. "I swear it is," Benny growled. Not loud, not threatening, just low and insistent, the sound he made when something didn't belong. He stepped closer, his nose lowering toward Ashley's bag where it had fallen open on the floor. She tried to shift, to shield it with her body, but Benny was already there, sniffing sharply, focused. "Get him away from me," she shrieked. "Benny," I said quietly, "easy." He ignored me not out of disobedience, but certainty. With one swift motion, he hooked the strap of the bag with his teeth and pulled. The contents spilled across the floor. A small cosmetic pouch, keys, a phone charger, and then a box of tampons. Silence fell like a held breath. Benny nudged again, pushing something else forward with his nose. A crumpled receipt slid across the hardwood and came to rest near my foot. I bent down slowly and picked it up. The paper was thin, warm from the room, ordinary in every way except for what it said. 4 tequila shots, yesterday, time-stamped, signed. I stared at it for a long moment, then lifted my eyes to Ashley's face. Her crying had stopped. Her mouth opened, then closed again. No sound came out. The mask slipped just for a second, and beneath it was something cold and calculating and terrified. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You aren't pregnant," I said quietly. David sucked in a sharp breath. "Ashley?" She shook her head wildly. "That doesn't mean anything. I could have been out before I knew." "Stop," I said. The word cut cleanly through her excuses. I held up the receipt. 4 tequila shots yesterday. And tampons. You didn't even bother to hide them. The truth settled into the room, heavy and undeniable. The manipulation wasn't impulsive. It was practiced. She had reached for the one lie she thought would break me, because she understood exactly where my heart was most vulnerable. I felt something inside me harden, not into cruelty, but clarity. I stood. Ashley scrambled backward on her knees, staring up at me now as if seeing a stranger. David looked between us, his world collapsing in slow motion. "You aren't pregnant, Ashley," I said evenly. "And David, you aren't an owner." My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags." Benny sat at my side again, solid and unmoving, and this time there was no argument left to make. They didn't move. For a moment, I wondered if they were waiting for me to soften again, if they believed time itself might wear me down the way they always had. David leaned back against the counter, forcing a laugh that came out too loud, too brittle. Ashley crossed her arms, chin lifted in defiance, eyes still darting around the room as if looking for an exit that wasn't there. "You won't do it," David said, shaking his head. "You won't call the cops on your own son." There it was. The final shield. Blood. Obligation. the old leverage he had relied on his entire life. I studied his face, the nervous twitch near his mouth, the way his foot tapped despite the bravado. I saw the child he once was layered beneath the man he had become, and I felt something close to grief pass through me. Not sharp anymore, just tired. I smiled. It surprised him more than anger ever could. "Oh, David," I said softly, "you still don't understand." I reached for my teacup, lifting it with steady hands. The steam curled upward, fragrant and calm, completely at odds with the tension coiling in the room. "I didn't call the cops," I continued. "I called the health inspector." Ashley's face flickered, confusion giving way to alarm. "What are you talking about?" "The garage," I said. "The cages. The paperwork you never filed. The breeding operation you thought no one would notice because the dogs couldn't speak." Her mouth fell open. "That's not. It is," I said. "And it's illegal." Benny's ears perked up at the sound of distant sirens, faint but unmistakable. One of the dogs whimpered softly, then fell silent, as if sensing that something long overdue was finally arriving. David's laugh died in his throat. "No," he said. "No, you wouldn't." The sirens grew louder, closer. Ashley spun toward the window. "David," she whispered, panic shredding her voice. "What did you do?" He looked at her, wild-eyed. "I thought you said it was fine. You said no one checked." I took another sip of tea, letting the moment breathe, letting them feel it. "There's more," I said gently. "Since we're finally being honest." I reached into my purse one last time and placed a folder on the table, thicker than the others, heavier with consequence. "I transferred my entire fortune this morning," I said. "Every account, every asset." David lunged forward, grabbing the folder with shaking hands. He flipped through it frantically, his face draining as the words sank in. "An irrevocable trust," he whispered. No, this can't be." "It is," I said. "It's called the Benny and Friends Animal Rescue." Ashley let out a strangled sound. "You can't leave him nothing." "I can," I replied. "And I have." The sirens wailed right outside now, red and blue light washing over the walls like a reckoning. I felt no joy in it, only release. "The house you're standing in," I added, "is already listed for sale. The proceeds will go to the charity as well. Dogs deserve safety, loyalty, care." I looked at Benny, then back at them. "They don't deserve to be used." David's shoulders collapsed inward, the weight of it finally crushing him. "I'm your son," he said hoarsely. "I know," I answered. "That's why this hurts." The knock at the door was firm, official, final. I stood and walked to the door, my movements unhurried. When I opened it, 2 officers stood there, the night air cool against my face. I took one last sip of tea before meeting their eyes. "Officers," I said calmly, stepping aside. "The squatters are right here." Behind me, the house exhaled, as if it had been holding its breath for years. And for the first time in a very long while, so had I. The shouting doesn't stop even as the door closes behind them. David's voice fractures into something shrill and unrecognizable, a mix of rage and disbelief, while Ashley's accusations tumble out in sobbing fragments about betrayal, about cruelty, about a mother who went crazy. The words scatter into the air and die there, powerless. 2 officers guide them down the driveway, firm but calm, while a third keeps his hand lightly on David's elbow, as if reminding him that this moment is real, irreversible. Neighbors have gathered without meaning to. Curtains part. A man across the street pauses mid-walk with his dog. An older woman stands barefoot on her porch, one hand pressed to her chest. For the first time, no one looks at Winifred with pity or confusion. They look at David and Ashley, at the flailing anger, the lies unraveling in public, and something settles into place. The story finally makes sense. The garage door is open now. The truth spills out under fluorescent light crates, makeshift cages, paperwork taped to the wall. The 7 dogs are brought out one by one by the rescue team Winifred hired days ago, long before anyone knew this would be the ending. Each dog hesitates at the threshold, unsure, tails low, eyes searching. Gentle hands guide them. Soft voices murmur reassurances. Leashes click into place like promises. When the last one is carried into the van, a quiet applause ripples from the sidewalk. Not loud, not triumphant, just relieved. Winifred watches until the van pulls away, until the street returns to stillness. The driveway feels enormous without the noise, without the constant tension that had lodged itself in her chest for years. Silence wraps around her, not the sharp, lonely kind she once feared, but something clean, restful. She exhales, realizing she's been holding her breath for far too long. She doesn't cry. Not now. There is grief, yes, but it's distant, like an old bruise you finally stop touching. She thinks of the boy David once was, the way he used to fall asleep in the back seat with his head against the window, trusting completely that she would get him home. That boy is gone. What remains is not her failure, not her burden. She didn't lose a son tonight. She let go of a parasite that had been feeding on her love and calling it loyalty. Benny pads up beside her, nails clicking softly on the concrete. He sits without being asked, pressing his warm body against her leg. The weight of him is grounding, real. She bends down and cups his face in her hands, her forehead resting against his for a moment. "It's just us now," she whispers, and for the first time, that thought doesn't scare her. She loads him into the back seat of the rental car, buckling his harness with careful fingers. The house behind her stands quiet and hollow, stripped of its poison. Someone else will live there soon. Someone who doesn't know the years of manipulation that once echoed off those walls. That chapter is closed. Winifred gets into the driver's seat and closes the door. The sound is solid, final. She adjusts the rearview mirror and pauses. The woman looking back at her is older, yes, but her eyes are clear. There is strength there, capability, freedom she had forgotten she was allowed to claim. She turns slightly to look at Benny. Ready for an adventure, partner? He answers with a sharp, joyful bark, tail thumping against the seat, already certain. Winifred smiles, puts the car in drive and pulls away from the curb. She doesn't glance back at the house. The road stretches ahead, open and undefined, and for the first time in years, that feels like a gift. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and quiet courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are waiting just down the road.